If you want to be healthy, then don't eat anything that didn't exist 100 years ago. Now, I don't think the big food corporations would be too happy with me saying that, but it's true. Over the last decade working in emergency medicine, I've watched literally thousands of people come through the doors with complications from diabetes, heart disease, strokes, conditions that are almost entirely preventable. And the prevalence of these is continuing to rise despite all of these advances in medicine. And when you start looking at the patterns, when you really start asking what changed in the last century, you realize something quite concerning. Big food corporations and governments of all colours have prioritised profits over health. And our health is largely shaped by our environment around us and the food available to us. Now, there's an ingredient hiding in almost everything we eat that didn't exist in our food supply 100 years ago. It's not listed as sugar on the label. You can't taste it, and yet it can spike your blood sugar faster than a tablespoon of normal table sugar. If you've cut out sugar but your glucose is still all over the place, then this is probably why. Now, just a quick one to say that if you don't want to miss a single video about how to live longer and healthier, then don't forget to hit that subscribe button below. And if you are subscribed, then thank you so much. Anyway, so what is this ingredient that we're talking about here? Well, we're talking about industrial refined starches, things like maltodextrin, cornstarch, and modified food starch. These are not whole foods. This isn't potatoes or rice or oats. These are processed ingredients that get added to food during manufacturing. And they're absolutely everywhere, honestly. The reason most people have never heard of them or don't pay attention to them is because they're hiding in plain sight on ingredient lists, and they don't show up where you'd expect them to on the nutrition labels. What makes this so problematic is that these ingredients are essentially invisible to the average person trying to eat well. Now, you might be scanning your food labels for carbohydrates and sugars, checking the line that says carbohydrates of which sugars, and feeling proud that you've chosen something with 0 grams of sugar. But that same product could contain maltodextrin or modified starch, and your body is going to respond to it almost identically to sugar, sometimes worse. The way food labels are structured creates this genuine blind spot that really isn't fair. You see carbohydrates as the total, and underneath that you see of which sugars. Now, maltodextrin and these other refined starches fall under carbohydrates, but they don't get counted as sugars, even though physiologically they behave like sugar in your bloodstream. So you can have a product labelled sugar-free or low sugar that still causes a massive glucose spike because the maltodextrin isn't technically classified as sugar on the label. And here's what your body actually experiences. When you eat maltodextrin, it's rapidly broken down into glucose. The speed at which this happens is what matters, and maltodextrin is broken down extremely quickly. Your blood sugar rises really quick, your pancreas pumps out insulin to deal with it, and you get the same metabolic response you'd get from eating pure sugar. In fact, the glycemic index of maltodextrin, which measures how fast a food raises your blood sugar, is often higher than table sugar. So sugar-free absolutely does not mean glucose-free, and that distinction is critical. So let's break down what's actually going on here in pretty straightforward terms. So starch is just chains of glucose molecules linked together. When you eat any starch, your body has to break down those chains to absorb the glucose. How quickly that happens depends entirely on the structure of the starch and what else is present in the food. Now, industrial processing does something quite dramatic to these starches. It strips away fibre, it breaks down the natural structure, and it turns what would have been a slow-release carbohydrate into something that digests almost instantly. What you end up with is glucose flooding into your bloodstream at a rate that your body wasn't designed to handle regularly. Your pancreas responds by releasing a large amount of insulin to break that glucose back down. This is the same hormonal cascade that happens when you eat sweets or chocolate or drink a fizzy drink. The processing has turned a complex carbohydrate into something that behaves like simple sugar, even though chemically it's still starch. And this really matters because your body doesn't care what the label says. It doesn't know whether the glucose came from a chocolate bar or a healthy protein bar with maltodextrin. The metabolic consequence is the same: a sharp spike, a big insulin response followed by an energy crash as your blood sugar plummets back down. And this is arguably the most concerning part about all of this, because maltodextrin and these other refined starches aren't just in obvious junk food. They're in products that people buy specifically because they're trying to be healthy. Now, protein bars are a classic example here, and I'm sure many of you, like me, have eaten these in the past. Now, you pick one up thinking it's a smart choice. You check the sugar content and it looks okay, but then you look at the ingredient list and maltodextrin is sitting right there in the top 5 ingredients. The same goes for meal replacement shakes, and an obvious brand comes to mind here. But other things like low-fat yogurts, sauces, salad dressings, even supplements and protein powders. Food manufacturers use these ingredients for very practical reasons. They're incredibly cheap, they improve the texture and the mouthfeel of products, and they extend the shelf life. From a business perspective, they're brilliant, but from a metabolic health perspective, they're an absolute disaster. What ends up happening is that people think they're making good choices. They're avoiding sugar, they're reading the labels, but they're still consuming ingredients that are driving the exact metabolic problems that they're trying to avoid. Your blood sugar doesn't know that it came from a protein bar instead of a donut. All of this is a bit concerning, but before anyone panics and decides to cut out all carbohydrates, we need to draw a very clear line between these industrial starches and real whole food starches. Potatoes, lentils, oats, beans, whole grains, these foods contain starch, yes, but they're packaged completely differently. They come with fiber, which is so important. They have intact cellular structure and they digest far more slowly. The fiber slows down the absorption of glucose, the structure takes time to break down, and the overall glycemic impact is dramatically different. This is why you can eat a bowl of oats for breakfast and feel full and steady for quite a while, albeit not as long as if you'd had mostly protein and healthy fats, but that's another story. But a protein bar with maltodextrin will give you a quick burst of energy followed by a crash. It's the same macronutrient, carbohydrate, but the metabolic effect is completely different. Processing matters more than the carbohydrate itself. That's the key insight here. It's not about fearing starch or carbs in general. It's about recognizing that when you strip away the natural structure and the fiber, you fundamentally change how your body responds to that food. Now, if this was just about short-term energy fluctuations, then it would be annoying, but not that serious. But the real problem is what happens when you're spiking your blood sugar repeatedly, day after day, year after year. Every time your blood sugar spikes, your pancreas releases insulin. Insulin's job, as you probably know, is to get that glucose out of your bloodstream and into your cells. But when you're constantly spiking glucose and insulin, your cells start to become less responsive to it. This is called insulin resistance, and it's the underlying mechanism behind type 2 diabetes, obesity, fatty liver disease, and a host of other metabolic conditions. What makes this really dangerous is that insulin resistance doesn't just affect your blood sugar. Insulin is a storage hormone. When insulin is elevated, your body is in storage mode. It's very difficult to burn fat when insulin is constantly switched on. So if you're someone who's eating frequently, or you're snacking on bars and shakes that contain maltodextrin, or you're drinking meal replacements, then your insulin is never really coming down. You're keeping yourself in a state where fat burning is essentially impossible, and you're driving yourself towards insulin resistance without realizing it. This is the pattern that I see constantly in the patients that I meet every single week. People come in with complications from diabetes, and when you dig into their history, when you ask what foods they eat, they've been eating what they thought were really healthy foods for years. They've been avoiding sugar, they've been trying to eat the right thing, but they've been consuming these hidden refined starches that have been quietly sabotaging their health the entire time. So what does this mean practically? Well, the first most obvious thing is that you need to start reading ingredient lists. Not just looking for sugar, but looking for ingredients like maltodextrin, modified food starch, corn syrup. These are all red flags. If they're high up on the ingredients list, then that product is going to spike your blood sugar, regardless of the sugar content. The second thing is to prioritize whole foods wherever possible. If you're choosing a snack, then opt for something like nuts or even cheese or fruit or whole food carbohydrates like sweet potato or oats. If you need a protein bar occasionally, then fine, but treat it like what it is, a processed convenience food, not a health food. And if you do use a protein powder or a meal replacement, which I really wouldn't recommend, then choose ones that don't contain maltodextrin. There are brands out there that use whole food carbohydrate sources or use less carbs overall, but like I said, they're still not going to be good for you. The third thing is, when you do eat carbs, eat them with fiber and protein. What this does is it slows down digestion and blunts the glucose spike. A jacket potato with tuna and salad is a completely different metabolic event compared to a low-fat, healthy muffin made with refined flour and maltodextrin. The potato has fiber and structure, and you're eating it with protein and fat. The muffin, which you might think is healthy, has none of that. It might have the same carbohydrate content, but the impact is completely different. So here's the bottom line. This video isn't about banning sugar or banning carbs. It's about understanding what actually hits your bloodstream and how your body responds to it. The food industry has become very good at creating products that look healthy on paper, but are metabolically problematic in practice. Maltodextrin and these other refined starches are just one example of this, but they're a significant one because they're so widespread and so invisible to most people. If you take just one thing away from this, it's that processing changes everything. You don't need to fear carbohydrates, but you do need to be aware of how those carbohydrates are packaged. Whole foods, fiber, protein, healthy fats, these are the things that protect you from blood sugar chaos. But industrial ingredients designed for shelf stability and profit margins, they're not good for you.